Hey everyone, what's up? You're watching Game Pulse, and today we're going to talk about 15 awesome single-player games from the past. And right away, straight up in the intro, let me explain. Single-player games from the past means games that came out before 2014, maybe 2015 at the latest. So basically games that are like 10 years old right now, or even older, but they're still totally worth your time. BioShock Infinite. Right now, sadly, this is the last game in this incredible series, and for many people, it's literally the best entry in the franchise. It tells us this super twisted but really interesting story about the main character, Booker DeWitt, who this time doesn't head to the underwater city of Rapture, but instead to the floating city in the sky called Columbia. His mission is simple: kidnap a girl named Elizabeth, and in return all his debts get wiped. But that's just the setup. The actual story goes way deeper, and that's what makes it more interesting. So once again, I'm telling you, don't rush through your first playthrough. Explore everything and study it all. If you just run through it like a shooter with magic, you'll probably miss the whole vibe. Though, who am I kidding? After I beat the game, I went straight to YouTube and watched plot breakdowns to make sure I didn't miss anything. As for the gameplay, well, I won't drag this out, and it's just a first-person shooter, where you gotta combine gunfights with the hero's abilities, which can really mix up combat with enemies in a cool way. Everything's like in the previous games in the series, except the game became a bit more dynamic and way more beautiful. When I launched it in 2025, my jaw literally almost dropped at how good the game still looks to this day. And remember, back then, there was no RTX or any of that stuff. But the devs somehow managed to put out truly gorgeous projects. The game still looks absolutely stunning, both in terms of lighting and reflections and in its art style. Especially seeing the City of Rapture again, but in a different style, was doubly awesome. Bottom line, for those who appreciate incredible story-driven games, skipping BioShock Infinite, and honestly the whole series, is just not acceptable. Far Cry 3. Yeah, that same game where everyone remembers the memes about insanity, and that same game that fans of this series still consider one of the best in the franchise. And honestly, that's not surprising, because Far Cry 3 was the one that started this whole vision of the series 12 years ago. You know, an amazing villain, interesting story, well-crafted stealth, open-world gameplay with towers and outposts. The story in Far Cry 3 follows the main character, Jason Brody, who flew out with his friends to celebrate his younger brother's license, but ends up getting captured by pirates on a local island. The mission is super simple. Escape and prove to this island that it's not you who's trapped with the pirates, but the pirates who are trapped with you. Or more precisely, take out absolutely every thug in your path and get revenge on the main villain. By the way, the main villain of Far Cry 3 is also kind of the cherry on top of the game, which is why people loved the third one so much. And honestly, it's not surprising because the Canadian actor who brought Voss to life nailed his role 100%. And the game itself didn't disappoint either. At launch, there were almost no, boring missions. Literally every quest in the story was interesting in its own way. A lot of people especially remember that mission, where you had to burn weed to an awesome track all in all. A true legend in the series. And even though over time I came to love the fifth game more, that doesn't take away from the third one's achievements and success at all. If you haven't played it, I really recommend fixing that. Uncharted, the Nathan Drake Collection. What is this amazing title and amazing collection? Let me try to explain. Back in the day, or more precisely during the 7th generation of consoles, for the PlayStation 3, Naughty Dog Studio released the magnificent Uncharted trilogy. This series became a massive success for the studio, and the fourth game just solidified and properly wrapped up Nathan Drake's story. So, to make sure all this goodness didn't just sit on the old PS3, they decided to remaster the whole trilogy for the modern, by those standards, PS4. Obviously, they bumped up the resolution to full HD and brought in stable 60 frames per second. The Uncharted trilogy itself is just a magnificent adventure about Nathan Drake. In the style of Indiana Jones' Uncharted 2, by the way, is still one of the best games in this series for me. Probably on the level of the fourth one. In each game, you play as a treasure hunter and once again set off looking for adventure to save your own butt. And in each game, it's always different locations. In the second game, there's just an insane amount of them, which is why I loved that game so much. Literally in every game of this trilogy, you get tons of epic scenes, puzzle solving, and a simple but often interesting story that won't take much time but stays with you for a long time. If you love epic adventures just like some awesome movie, then skipping the Uncharted trilogy in your case is just not acceptable. But let's be honest, not everyone needs hardcore gameplay. Today we're talking about single-player games after all, and those are primarily projects with good stories in terms of plot. And in that regard, I just have to mention Mafia 2. I played through Mafia 2 way more than once or twice as a kid, for sure, because I just loved this game. Back then, funny enough, turns out that back then, fans of the first Mafia didn't accept the second one at all and called it complete garbage, but for me, and I think many others at the time, it was absolutely not like that. Why? Well, simply because I didn't have internet back then to read or listen to people whining that the game was somehow wrong. And second, everyone in my circle as a kid loved Mafia 2 like crazy, because it's a simple but incredibly atmospheric story about an ordinary guy, Vito Scaletta, who returns from war and starts a new life directly tied to the criminal world. The whole game is a complete and incredibly interesting story where we literally start as a regular low-level grunt in a mafia family doing simple errands, but then eventually become a full-fledged mobster, so to speak. The game has tons of interesting characters, both positive and not so much. Just take Vito's friend, Joe. For me, he's the main highlight of the game, without which Mafia 2 probably wouldn't be as iconic as it is right now. And I just can't skip over the amazing soundtrack in this game. I think I'm far from the only one who fell in love with music from that era specifically. Thanks to Mafia 2. By the way, this year there's a real reason to check out this game, because a major mod called The Final Cut came out for it, which adds more cut content and lets you look at the already solid story from a completely different angle. All in all, I genuinely recommend people who aren't familiar with Mafia 2's story yet to give it a try. It's worth it. Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance. Let's be clear right away. I don't know the lore of the main Metal Gear series and unfortunately, or fortunately, haven't played through any of the numbered games in the series yet. So fans, please don't throw tomatoes and rotten eggs at me. Save them for the Metal Gear Solid 3 remake. Because today we're talking about a pretty decent spin-off in this series in my opinion, which I only checked out because of internet memes. At some point there were just too many of them and I thought, well, I gotta find out why. And initially I expected nothing from the game, and that was one of the best decisions of my life. Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance is an awesome and in some ways even casual slasher, consisting of a couple buttons where you don't need to memorize tons of combos, just enjoy the gameplay. Here we play as the cyborg Raiden and have to slice up our enemies like a chef cutting cabbage, almost literally. At the same time, the game is great both because of the beautifully choreographed combat combinations and the incredible tracks. Literally every boss in this game has their own musical theme, and it doesn't just complement the fight. It charges you up to create total carnage on screen. Almost every boss fight starts with light, building music, and the more epic the battle gets, the harder the track plays, and it's hard to describe in words what emotions you start feeling at that moment. And yeah, the game is good, not just because of the music and fights, but also because of the awesome charismatic characters and interesting story. So basically, those nanomachines you should definitely check out. Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag. You know, everyone who's familiar with the Assassin's Creed series definitely has their favorite game in it. Well, I don't have one favorite game. I love 3 games in the series, and I still can't decide which game is better, or honestly, I just don't see the point. So today, let's talk about the amazing story of a pirate from the 4th game. I like the story of the 4th Assassin's Creed primarily because of the main character, because this isn't another saint who wants to save the world, you know, all proper and righteous. Nope. Here, the hero is way more ordinary and relatable to many who played this game. Because Edward Kenway's goal is money, fame, lots of booze, freely roaming the seas, and plenty of beautiful women, which once sold a lot of people. The game is literally completely soaked in pirate romance, like Pirates of the Caribbean, which is why the naval battles in Black Flag still look just amazing to this day, and in my opinion, even better than in Skull and Bones, which came out and flopped. And let's be real, I think I'm not the only one who played that Pirates of the Caribbean track and wildly enjoyed the naval shenanigans in this game. By the way, the game itself still looks really good considering it's 12 years old right now. If you were looking for a simple story without another over-the-top show about saving the world and all that, then trust me, you shouldn't skip Black Flag. Especially the ending of the game, which I think made more than just me shed a manly tear. However, if you love a simple story combined with awesome action gameplay, without needing to know all sorts of mythologies and stuff, then the perfect choice would be to check out Bulletstorm. I honestly just bought the game for fun on sale and thought I'd play it and forget about it. But in the end, the game hooked me so hard that I beat it in one go over just a couple days and was really satisfied. And for the game to hook me personally, it only needed a couple things. Extremely brutal gameplay with amazing dynamics, beautiful graphics, and a simple but interesting story, combined with dark humor throughout the whole game. Honestly, there are actually very few games that can successfully combine all of the above, and Bulletstorm's developers managed to do it brilliantly back then. The gameplay itself, besides the usual run-and-shoot mechanics, uses close combat mechanics really well, where you can either spectacularly kick an opponent or pull them with a whip. Plus, you can use this whip on the environment too. For example, grab a bomb and then kick it into a crowd of enemies and watch some serious carnage on screen. Bulletstorm is definitely a masterpiece of its time, and it's such a shame it probably won't get a sequel, even though the ending openly hints at one. Tomb Raider from 2013. I think you can rightfully call this game a great alternative to Uncharted, one that PC users can actually play. Don't get me wrong, Lara Croft existed way before Nathan Drake's adventures, but it was the Uncharted series that nailed the perfect formula of a simple and interesting story, combined with pleasant dynamic gameplay. In other words, like an Indiana Jones adventure, but as an awesome game. That's exactly why the Tomb Raider 2013 reboot is the perfect hybrid of a solid Lara Croft adventure, with amazingly executed action for its time and a simple story. The game's story, in classic Lara Croft fashion, tells how our Tomb Raider and her team crash on a mysterious island. The thing is, this island doesn't let anyone leave, and you can't just walk away from it. That's what the whole plot revolves around, which we have to figure out. By the way, even though it's a 2013 game and honestly 12 years old now, it still looks pretty good. And what's funny is, even though I played through the whole rebooted Lara Croft trilogy, it was the 2013 game that I got seriously hooked on back in the day, as I explored the local island to 100%, solving tons of puzzles and exploring all sorts of tombs. If you love a great adventure with really energetic action on screen, like a Hollywood blockbuster, then Tomb Raider from 2013 would be the perfect choice to check out. Battlefield 4 is not only one of the best games story-wise in the whole Battlefield series, in my opinion, but also one of those games thanks to which I started listening to Bonnie Tyler. Not all her tracks, but a couple definitely made it into my personal playlist. The single-player campaign itself here, like in the third one, isn't super long. You can beat it in a couple evenings, but you can get some serious enjoyment. The game's story tells you about another military conflict between superpowers where you play as the main character, a Marine and his squad, and you complete various missions in different hotspots. Literally every mission, and there aren't many, is executed incredibly well, both in terms of presentation and visually. I think there's no point talking about how good the game still looks, considering it's already a decade old. You want to praise not just the visuals and overall picture, but also the sounds. Literally every firefight is pure bliss for your ears, and the shooting itself here for a shooter is incredibly satisfying. And, it's honestly kind of sad to realize that Battlefield 4 and with a stretch, Hardline are the last games in the series that had any kind of story campaign like Call of Duty. Yeah, short and brief, but the emotions from it were positive anyway. It's especially sad realizing that right now there's literally nothing like this from new games. Even Call of Duty was still trying to show somewhat reasonable stories back in 2019, and that's it. There are literally no more shooters like that right now. So if for some reason you still skipped Battlefield 4's story campaign, you should definitely fix that. Alan Wake's American Nightmare. Honestly, this game is really just DLC for the first Alan Wake, but for some reason I personally don't understand. It's a full separate game. Its story once again tells us about the writer Alan Wake and the nightmare he finds himself in. It's like a time loop he needs to escape from. If before, the game's events took place in the town of Bright Falls, which I understand is somewhere in Washington State, This time, the game's events move us to the opposite side of the continent, Arizona. The game's plot, like in the first part, is just as convoluted and confusing. So to understand it, you really shouldn't just rush through the game just to get it over with quickly, but read all sorts of notes. By the way, these notes now not only add to the story, but also let you unlock different weapons as you progress. There's way more of the latter, by the way, than in the original. The game as a whole puts its emphasis more on full-on action rather than atmosphere, where you constantly have to fight enemies possessed by darkness. First, you need to shine your flashlight on enemies and knock out all the darkness, then feed the enemy bodies some lead. Everything's basically like in the first part. Overall, the DLC turned out kinda, decent and worth playing through, so if you skipped it, I recommend fixing that. This advice probably applies to literally any good single-player game, because it fits perfectly for Heavy Rain as well. It's funny, actually. I knew for a long time that Heavy Rain is a really good game in the interactive movie genre, which got plenty of positive reviews over time, both from critics and obviously players. But I only checked out the game myself this year and overall never regretted it once. The game's story tells you about a serial killer called the Origami Killer. The reason is simple. He kidnaps children, and later they're found drowned in rainwater. And at the crime scene lies an origami figure. For the most part, Heavy Rain is a story about what a father is capable of to save his son. Because even though there are several heroes in the game, there's really only one main one. Ethan, whose son gets kidnapped and he has to find him. However, the other three heroes also take part in this, even though they're barely connected to each other. For example, you'll control a private detective investigating crimes, a young FBI agent who just started and needs to solve his first case, and a journalist, Madison, who's also interested in this for her future career. Heavy Rain can seem like a very depressing game in many ways, but incredibly interesting on your first playthrough. Too bad there's no desire to replay the game after you find out who the Origami Killer is, because the whole interest of the game is finding out the identity of the mysterious serial killer. And when you know it, it's like there's no interest in replaying it anymore. Red Dead Redemption. I'll say right away that this is probably a true diamond from Rockstar, and probably one of their best creations I've ever played through. Some people for some reason call this game GTA in the Wild West, and that's really weird because the only thing it has in common with the GTA series is the open world and criminal story. Everything else is a completely different game. The game's story, by the way, directly continues events after the second part, which was a prequel to the first one, where our main character is John Marston. He's probably, far from the smartest outlaw in the Wild West, who gets grabbed by the balls by the feds and forced to work for them, giving the main character an ultimatum. Find and eliminate former members of your gang, and in return, get a free life with your family. So, throughout the whole game, you have to track down the thugs you once worked with and eliminate each one. And even though the first Red Dead Redemption came out 15 years ago, in terms of open world and atmosphere, it still stands head and shoulders, if not two heads, above many modern open world games. I have no idea how Rockstar pulled this off, but I literally tried to beat the game 100% on my first playthrough, completing every quest I could find. And yeah, back then I played it through a Nintendo emulator when they ported it there, but now you can enjoy the full PC port available on Steam. Assassin's Creed 3. Another game from Ubisoft Studio in this video, and not the last one. Yeah, I won't hide it. I used to really love games from this studio, and Assassin's Creed 3 for me is one of my favorite games in the series, right up there with the fourth and second. At the very least, because the third game told an interesting story back then and let you, let's say, look at the conflict between assassins and Templars from different sides, not just divide it into black and white. Plus, this time there were two heroes, and each of their stories is interesting in its own way, both because of the events they participate in and because of the heroes themselves, who I think were written pretty well. I won't spoil anything, even though the game is already 13 years old, but whatever. By the way, starting with the third game, the game became a bit different from the second and first. This affected both the parkour, which became way easier, and the combat, which obviously borrowed from the Arkham series. So fighting in this game became pure pleasure, I think. I'm far from the only one who just launched the game, found a crowd of enemies, and created a pretty bloody and epic spectacle on screen. The only thing is, the game itself can seem pretty drawn out. Like, you definitely won't beat it in a couple evenings, so keep that in mind if you decide to check it out. If Sony always had exclusives that you could say were the motivator to get yourself a console, then Microsoft with their Xbox 360 wasn't going to stand on the sidelines either. That's exactly why in 2006 the magnificent first Gears of War came out. I played through the whole numbered series of games, as well as the 2013 spin-off, and based on that gaming experience, I can pretty logically say that the first game from 2006 with its signature desaturated look and music is probably one of the darkest and most oppressive games in the series. Story-wise, the game's events take place on the planet Serra, where there's a certain type of humanity and there's a similar type of, let's say, mutants, or more simply, the Locust. That's what they're called in the game. Between these two, let's say, factions, a full-on war for survival has been going on for about 10 years, and we play as the pretty experienced soldier Marcus Phoenix. The first thing that probably hooked many people back in Gears of War was its cover system, where you could press against a certain wall or something similar, and that way both shoot at enemies and move from one cover to another. Now, a similar feature is in literally any modern game, but at that time it was supposedly something new. Plus, if you think the first Gears of War is just a shooter for one evening that you can run through super fast, trust me, you're wrong. I'm not talking about length, because we've got the standard length for games of that era here, but rather difficulty. The first Gears of War will make you suffer even on easy difficulty. And that's because enemies here are extremely smart. And if you think you can sit in one cover forever and shoot enemies like that, nothing doing, because enemies will flank you, pin you down, or just throw grenades at you, or just lay down crossfire. Literally every firefight in the first Gears of War is a full test of your nerves and logic, because getting out of another battle alive won't always happen on the first try. Batman Arkham City. This is an excellent example to literally all modern studios of how to make a sequel to a once successful first game. Namely, take what already worked well and bring it to true perfection. But let's take it in order. The story directly continues events after Arkham Asylum, though this time the action unfolds in one of Gotham's districts, Arkham City, hence the game's name. By the way, it's a special district for all of Gotham's scum, where we, playing as the Dark Knight, have to once again discipline all the psychos. Story-wise, the game revolves around Batman's identity being revealed by one of his villains, Hugo Strange, and our task is to stop him while finding out about Protocol 10 that he launched. The game's concept stayed true to the original. Plenty of crazy villains, and the task is to fight each one, and there'll be both ones we've already met and plenty of new ones appearing, and the fight with each one requires its own approach. I especially want to praise the combat itself. It's maximally seamless and smooth, and even though it consists of a couple buttons, it looks just amazing. Plus, this time, you don't just control Batman, but also get to play as Catwoman, and watching how she fights is pure pleasure. The game also got bigger, both story-wise and gameplay-wise, becoming more interesting. They really worked on it well back then. If you liked Arkham Asylum, then skipping its sequel just makes no sense.